Welcome to Somerset Stories. I'm your host, Kathy Pickar. Somerset Stories offers insight into our community, a small town democracy, and its wonderful residents. I like to think of it as a digital time capsule that is for both our current generation and future. And just maybe when Somerset has its bicentennial celebration in the early 22nd century, we'll offer some insight that they will enjoy. Our two guests today are environmental activists and residents who are working hard to protect and improve the quality of our natural environment, beginning right in Somerset. Sarah Morse is a native Marylander, is a founding member of the Little Falls Watershed Alliance, and although formerly trained as an artist, as we all know in the community, she has been very active both in Somerset and beyond in far more ways than I can begin to tell you here. And she is, as I said, one of the founding members of the Little Falls Watershed Alliance, which we look forward to hearing more about. Robin Barr is a native of Scotland, formerly trained in experimental psychology, and came to the United States in 1980 with no intention of staying, but lucky for us, he did. As an academic in Indiana and now at National Institute of Health, Robin is a founding member of Somerset's Environmental Committee. Welcome, Sarah and Robin. First thing I want to talk about today with each of you in your respective roles is how you became involved and how your organizations started. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about Little Falls Watershed Alliance and how it came about.
Well, to start with, we'll move back to when my children were young. I was the stream team monitor for Somerset Elementary School, and for 14 years, I took fourth graders into the stream that runs behind the pool and looked for macroinvertebrates, little critters living there. And after 10 years, it went pretty well. The creek was pretty healthy, and then the creek died. And we didn't find anything besides leeches and black fly larvae. And the kids turned to me and said, "Mrs. Morse, what happened?" And even though I've been monitoring a long time, I had no idea. So I set out to answer them. And while doing that, I came across another group of neighbors south of River Road who were starting an environmental stewardship group for the Little Falls Creek. And I became a founding member, and since then we're in our 10th year right now, and we are committed to protecting and improving the health and environment of Little Falls Watershed, which of course is the creek and the surrounding area.
Okay, and the little stream that runs through Somerset, you know, I'm looking at this map here, which I think we'll be putting up on the show. What is the name of this little stream that runs through Somerset? And I assume it flows into the Little Falls?
No, the creek that runs through Somerset is the Little Falls branch.
Oh, it is. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it starts right in the golf course, and it runs back behind Somerset, and then it becomes a trapezoidal channel, and then it runs down Massachusetts Avenue, and it flows into the Potomac at the Little Falls.
Well, do other tributaries flow into Little Falls Creek?
It's Little Falls Branch, and branch is a Maryland word, an old-fashioned word that means creek. Like we have Muddy Branch, we have Paint Branch, right. We have Northwest Branch. It just means creek. I used to think it meant a tributary of something, but it's not.
So just to clarify, I hear you frequently talking about the Willett Branch.
The Willett Branch, so that's another creek that flows into the Little Falls Branch.
It does. And is there another one, yet another one that flows into Little Falls?
The
Minnehaha?
The Minnehaha, and there's a little thing that comes down from Spring Valley by the Del Carla Reservoir. It's a really juicy area that we're in. Lots and lots of springs. In fact, if you go through at the end of Warwick, I guess our viewers will know where Warwick is.
Yes.
There's a spring right there. You walk down the path maybe 15 feet, and it's on the right. There's a really nice spring right there.
Oh, nice.
And so that's how creeks get their water, is from springs. So in order to have all these little creeks, you have to have springs everywhere. So
and what is the mission of Little Falls?
So our main park is called Little Falls Stream Valley Park, and that goes from Norwood Road all the way down to MacArthur Boulevard. And it's a narrow a narrow park. It's only maybe 100 feet wide. It just
Oh,
has
really?
yeah, it only has the creek in it. And so we work on, the mission is to protect the natural environment of the area. We focus mostly on water issues.
Okay.
And so we do anything that has to do with protecting the natural environment.
Right.
We do trash, we do native plant removal, and we work with developers to make sure that they...
Okay. We can talk about that
Yeah,
for a long time. Yeah, we'll come back to
Yeah.
that. Robin, how about you? You are on you were one of the founding members of the Environmental Committee, correct?
Yes, I was. The committee started in 2009, and I was appointed to it then, and I took over as chair in 2013. The committee in its early days was about streetlights and stormwater, and 10 years later, streetlights and stormwater are still with us, as a matter of fact.
Tell me a little bit about the street lights and when it was formed over street lights. What was going on?
Well, we have mercury vapor lights in the town with some high pressure sodium in there. They are a very old technology. They are very inefficient technology. They have mercury in them too, which is a little problematic.
And the mercury lights are no longer, I mean, we may have some old ones left, but those are no longer installed anywhere, right?
They are no longer installed
it's against
anywhere.
The law
so the PEPCO at the time was wanting to put high pressure sodium replacements in. That even in 2009 was an old technology too.
Correct.
And the committee was saying, no, you should introduce newer technologies. LED lights were coming in. They were saying, try LED lights. So we went.
And this was what year?
2009, 2010. And so that debate went on for a long while. In the end, PEPCO put in a pilot installation of LED lights on just one end of Cumberland, and they're still there.
And one end of Dorset.
Yes,
I have one in front of my house.
Yeah, sorry,
I love it.
It was Dorset, not Cumberland.
Yeah,
You're
I love
right.
it. I have one in front of my house too. I love it.
They were meant to be for 6 months. They've been there 10 years now.
Yes, we did.
Anyway, we still have our mercury vapor lights 10 years later, with a few high pressure sodium around the town. But we are now making progress. The PEPCO has changed its ways. They are actually creating some incentives for municipalities to install LED lights now, which
Good.
is quite a
That's
change.
quite a, I was on
Right.
council when we had all of the light controversy.
The
and it
other
was quite
technology that's
something.
out there is an old one too, induction lights. That's actually a 100-year-old technology, but they also are very efficient. Not as efficient as LEDs, but nevertheless they last 30 years like LEDs last 30 years, whereas the mercury vapor lights just die out like every 18 months, it feels like.
Right.
And so having those kind of lights would just make a lot more sense. And so we're going induction or LED lights at the moment, and trying to work with PEPCO to get there. So there is real improvement, and there's no longer antagonism. It is working together to come up with a solution.
Which is a wonderful, no longer antagonistic, which is a nice role to have with PEPCO, because it wasn't always that way.
It was a bit of a struggle back then.
It was. I remember that quite
Can
well.
we mention Alan Proctor? Because I feel like this was his mission, and I think he had a suit against PEPCO, right?
Oh, yes, he did. And Mike Hill was also very aggressive against PEPCO. And they were very old-fashioned back then. And, trying to see it from PEPCO's side, LEDs were this fancy new technology that wasn't proven, that they really didn't want to deal with it. And that was really it 10 years ago. Well, LED lights have come a long way since then.
Very quickly, I have to say.
And so PEPCO now has them on the tariff, and they realize they are the most energy efficient technology around. They are under incentives through the Empower Maryland Act to introduce energy efficiency. And so these LED lights are now part of that program.
Right.
And that's where the incentives are then coming in.
And I want to get back to the Empower Maryland issue in just a little bit. What about, you also mentioned water.
Yeah, we did. Stormwater. And again, we had a lot of action on that in the early days. I don't know if you've noticed, but there are hills in Somerset, and
Yes.
those hills carry water down them at a rapid rate.
Right to my house.
Yes, and some people anyway see that as a problem, but it's a problem not just for us, but it's a problem for the Potomac. It's a problem for the Bay, because it's not just water when it's rushing down there; it's carrying pollutants down as well into all these other creeks, rivers, and estuaries and bays.
So this is where the two of you, the organizations, overlap, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well in terms of how communities can interact with Little Falls.
Part of my role on the committee, though, was to broaden the agenda beyond those issues, and obviously I did a lot on composting. We worked to introduce municipal composting. It's all around sustainability, really. Everything is about that concept of sustainability, and even when I first became chair, we worked with the Parks and Natural Resources Committee to get the town, as you might remember yourself, to adopt sustainable practices in town gardening, to reduce pesticides and use more native plants. And the nice thing was that when we did that, the town workers themselves got quite enthusiastic about it and really followed through with it. So it was.
Well, I know that the Environmental Committee, I have benefited from several of from the seminars that you all sponsor one every year. And one of the first ones I remember had Paul Tukey, who is the Director of Sustainability, I'm not sure of the former title, but at Glenstone.
Yeah.
And it was very eye-awakening, and I'm hoping and I'm assuming that several residents, it was quite a crowded event, have learned quite a bit from the education component that the Environmental Committee is doing. And speaking of that, I just last night was able to, I unfortunately wasn't able to attend, but your most recent seminar was on energy efficiency.
Right.
And it was outstanding. I just reviewed it last night, the video, thanks to Channel 16.
Yes.
I was able to watch it, and I learned quite a bit.
Right, yes. We've got a little bit smarter with our seminars. Previously, we were just running them, and if you happened to be in town and attended the seminar, then you would learn something. Well, this time, no, Channel 16 helped out. We put the recording online, and so therefore you can still see the seminar today by going online and watching it. And
absolutely,
so
and I encourage our residents, I want to encourage our residents to do that because, and I'm hoping we can make it a little more accessible on our website. We'll be working on that, but it's a tremendous resource that you have. Yeah. And I also want to add that Little Falls Watershed Alliance website has a tremendous amount of information on it as well, and that I want to get into just a little bit later. But just briefly, before we have to round up our first segment, tell me what is the major issue you're working on right now. Tell me in terms of Little Falls Watershed. I know you have many important issues, and we're going to go
a lot of issues. I would say the thing that we're most proud of, and I just met with Parks yesterday, so it's on my mind, is to turn the Willett Branch, as you mentioned, one of the tributaries, into a regular creek. Right now, the Willett Branch is in a channelized concrete trapezoid. It runs on Cumberland. That's the Willett Branch also. It goes from Bethesda Pool underneath the Washington Episcopal School, behind Whole Foods and Ernie's, and then into it. So the plan is, part of the Westbard Master Plan, is to take the concrete out and make that a regular creek, and then to make a walking trail that will go from the Capel Crescent, back behind River Road, Whole Foods, across River Road, and then hit up with the Capel Crescent again.
And for those of you who don't know, the Capel Crescent Trail is the bike path, the former rail line.
It's a super highway, so this will be this will be a respite, a place where you can actually walk and maybe teach your toddler how to.
The Crescent Trail is a bike and walking trail, but it's quite frequently now mini bikes, which we love, but it's busy, and that's a good thing. What about the Environmental Committee?
Right. Well, as I said, I broadened the agenda, which means we're always working on several things at once. And yes, we're still working on streetlights, but one of the things we're doing right now is absolutely getting the message out about energy efficiency, and that seminar has been a critical piece of it. More broadly, in the composting recycling world, we are going to try to have push towards 70-30 in our own town of
great.
Somerset, which means only 30% of stuff going into the landfill when we throw it out.
And what a wonderful goal that is.
And that is the county goal, but we're saying, can we get there in the town first? That's what it's about.
Well, that's a good breaking spot. We're going to stop for just a moment. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back to pick up on these wonderful topics. Thank you.
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
Love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
Vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
Welcome back to Somerset Stories. I'm your host, Kathy Pickar, and our guests today are Sarah Morse of Little Falls Watershed Alliance and a Somerset resident, and also resident Robin Barr, who is the chair of the Environmental Committee. So when we left off, Sarah, we were talking about the creek and what killed it. And I want to read a quote that I was reading in an article just last night that was written by, I think it was Laura Hambleton of Chevy Chase West in one of the papers, and she said in that, in the 5 years since my daughter and I first visited our neighborhood creek, it had died right under our gaze, and we did nothing about it. Can you tell me why the creek died?
Wow, I remember that quote. That's a powerful quote. It was a sad moment to realize the creek had died. And what I found was water. Water is killing water. Too much storm water. Every time it rains, the water goes down the driveways, down the pavement, off the roof. It goes directly into the creek. It doesn't go to a water treatment plant. It doesn't go to a holding tank. It's not dribbled into the creek. It just goes right into the creek. And that volume and velocity of water entering the creek, it's like its own little tsunami right there in Somerset. It just comes out the storm drain inlets and whoosh, blows out the side of the creek. It buries all the little rocks. It's just loss of habitat destruction right there in our creek. You know, you have it at the North Pole and you have it at our creek. So that was the first step for me to find out what killed the creek, and that led me to the whole world of stormwater management and a whole terminology and professional world that I didn't even know existed. But the main problem is how to keep the water from entering the creek.
Ah.
So
and I just want to say, I walked with you once along our creek, and the velocity with which the water comes out of that particular one place
it's just amazing.
is amazing. And it does blow out. I think that's the best term.
It does.
Blows out the sides of the creek.
And they do all types of things in the creek to try to slow the water down. They put big rocks. They put landscaping
Now, when you
fabric.
say they, who are you talking about?
The county, the state, town of Somerset has spent $500,000 to try to slow the water down so that it won't erode the creek. But really, that's a Band-Aid. What we need to do is keep the water from coming in. So that's stormwater management.
How is Little Falls Watershed Alliance helping to keep the stormwater from coming in?
Well, Montgomery County has actually a really great program to plug Montgomery County called Rainscapes, and I know you're a benefit of Rainscapes.
I am. Yes.
So the idea is that instead of the water coming off your roof and going down your driveway and into the streets and into the storm drain system, which I just have to emphasize is not sewer, it's storm drains. A lot of people think that's a sewer and it goes to a water treatment plant. It doesn't. So if you put your paint, if you throw your paint in the gutter, it goes right into the creek, and we see that all the time.
Right. Oh my.
Yeah. I mean, if you throw a wrapper down the storm drain or a bag with dog dew in it, it just goes right into the creek.
Which goes right into the Potomac,
right?
Which goes right into the Chesapeake.
Right. So the idea, Montgomery County has the idea of getting the water back into the ground. So we do that with rain gardens, which is a special garden, not a swamp, where they
Right.
change out the soil and the water runs down the hill, or from you can redirect your downspout to it. It
Right.
fills up with water when it rains, and 24 hours the water is gone, the water is back into the ground, and it didn't go into the creek.
Right.
We have been, the best thing we did lately was we partnered with Overlook Community to do a stormwater management study for the community. They own 6 acres of common land, and to figure out where they can put in
Right.
rain gardens, where they can change out their pavement, and then we put in a huge demonstration rain garden that that
I want to plug, by the way, I want to plug the Rainscapes program for Montgomery County. I'm a beneficiary of it. We have a 300 square foot rain garden because we live at the bottom of Dorset Avenue and we receive a lot of water.
Yes, you certainly do.
Yes.
So
And
another
it's a wonderful program. They contribute, it's basically a grant for an individual. And so I do want to plug that. And I want to come back to the partnering a little bit with Little Falls, because I think it's interesting what you've done with Overlook. But in talking about the stormwater management, that I want to segue over to, I know, Robin, that's a big part of what
The Environmental
Committee
been doing. It
does.
certainly was part of the original agenda of the Environmental Committee. And we had to learn a lot, actually, to get any action going in the town. And it was, thinking back on it, a fascinating exercise. Some of the things you run into are resident objections to programs that are going to mitigate stormwater because they see other uses for that land. And even when the land is town land, they see other uses for that land, and so they don't want you to put in your rain garden or whatever. So you've got to overcome somehow resistance from landowners, residents. And even in the town, when you say, well, that water rushing in, maybe we should measure it so that you tell people, you can show the speed of the water flowing in. Nobody wants to pay for that measurement because it doesn't do anything. All
Well,
it
tell me a
does is
little bit
measure.
more about the measurement. What are you talking about?
Well,
with
there are
measurement?
devices now where you can install it in a drain pipe where you can actually record the speed of water flowing in the drain pipe. So you can actually measure how the rate of the water coming into the stream when there's a rain event, when there's a big storm coming in. And we had that in and we had estimates for it, but the town doesn't want to pay for it, it wouldn't pay for it because people felt they weren't getting anything out of it. There wasn't a garden being produced, there wasn't landscape being produced, we weren't mitigating in any sense by measuring.
Well, that gets back to all environmental awareness. We have to be visionaries. We have to think
But
in the future.
For me, I say we have to find another source of funds actually for that one, and that's
Yes.
that's really the answer. But what we did do after all those failures was worked with the town council, with Marnie Shaw, who really was a leader here, with the Parks and Natural Resources Committee, and there you're building up a coalition at that point is what you're doing.
Right.
Choosing town land that wasn't close to residencies, because then there weren't residencies who were particularly objecting, and what we did, of course, was plant a landscape in the town hall property running along the driveway next to the tennis courts, not near any homes.
But it does have runoff there, so that was a good place.
It has major runoff
Yes,
there.
it does.
And one of it's a steep bank there. It's a steep hill. And look at what Backyard Bounty, Edna Marie Matte put in there. You'll see mini terraces in the banks, which are a great way to mitigate stormwater runoff if your property happens to be on a hill.
Right.
And so you can actually go to that garden now and see the terraces and realize what it's doing. Now, I don't recommend you go to it in the heavy rain, but
Yes,
that's
right.
perhaps the most educational time when you can
Yeah.
see how the water is captured. Of course, you plant things on the various levels of the terraces so that there are therefore roots drawing in the water as it lingers on the terrace, and that's a great tool
Right.
if you live on a hill.
I've
Now-
often thought
Yeah.
that, living at the bottom of Dorset as I do, unfortunately the water misses our house, but if there is a lot of water and the rain garden has
doesn't
helped,
miss my house.
it would be so helpful if every
If
house
everybody had a rain garden.
coming
Right,
down
right.
had a
Yes,
rain garden.
right,
And wouldn't
yep.
it be wonderful if sometime in the future, in the zoning, countywide, or, I don't think
Right,
this
well,
will happen in my lifetime, but
So, no, they
everybody
have that.
It's also
has
that some
a rain garden.
areas are good for rain gardens and some aren't.
Right.
You got to think about other tools you can bring in.
Right.
And conservation landscaping generally is the idea. But
Tell
as I
me a
said,
little bit more about conservation landscaping.
Well,
What does it involve?
It's anything that can help preserve the landscape, which means reducing water flow.
Mm-hmm.
It means using native plants. It means creating a sustainable land. That's what conservation landscaping is about.
Right.
In the context of stormwater, it is, yes, rain gardens, using native plants because they have deeper roots
interesting.
that
Yeah.
draw in more water. They're also easier maintenance, by the way. And again, if you live on hills, using that terracing to manage the stormwater. And so you bring different tools to the task.
Right.
So
now,
what
in
we
fact,
would like to
the landscape that we built into the town hall area also has a rain garden in it. That is at the end of the landscape, which captures the runoff from the garage and from the road.
That is the town's garage.
Right,
yes. Which
and stops it flowing into the
Right.
creek there. So there's a lot in it.
Yes.
I asked residents to go look at that thing and see it. And by the way,
Right.
it's also going to be gorgeous. Marie Mate, who
It is
designed
going to be gorgeous, I agree.
Has arranged flowers for 3 seasons in the
Yeah.
year. It's just going to be
I'd
a
like to
wonderful thing.
point out to people as well that if you go to the county's Rainscapes website, you will get lists of plants that you can use for conservation landscape, for rain gardens. I found that very helpful.
Right,
Sarah, you were going to
Well,
say.
what we like to recommend, we found there's a pushback from people. People love their lawns. People love that look.
Right.
Well, just take 10% of your yard. It's not a big thing. Maybe a side yard that you're not using. Maybe your back 40, something by your shed. Just take 10% and put that in wildflowers, and put that in native landscaping. And so that's
Right.
like an entry level sort of thing. And if we can get people 10% up your hill even,
Yes.
you're going to start to see a big difference.
And I want to emphasize, too, that people who are concerned about the aesthetics, they may think that a rain garden is a swamp or that conservation, that it can be quite beautiful. And I love my property, and I love the aesthetic. I love a beautiful aesthetic of property. And I've found that my rain garden is absolutely beautiful. There's nothing swampy about it. And our conservation, the side that we did the conservation planting on and sort of built our own little dry creek, is absolutely beautiful.
and
It reminds me of going back to the Appalachian Mountains where I grew up.
So what you're going to find with the conservation is that non-native plants are sterile. No pollinators, no butterflies. People like them because nothing eats them. But they also don't have any function in the environment because nothing eats them. And when you put a native garden in, it's alive. It buzzes.
Yes, right.
You go to it. It's
You have
more
the
than
butterflies with the milkweed. And
right,
the,
and you have little bees, and
Yeah.
you have all those pollinators. The garden actually vibrates.
Right.
And so
That's a
you
good
get a
word.
different
Yeah.
sensation from a native garden. And
I've been
You know,
trying-
I think in talking about, we have just scratched the surface of what both organizations do. We haven't gone into composting, which I would like to do. So I think what we're going to need to do is come back and have
we'll be
another
happy to
show.
come back.
Yes.
Right, part 2.
And
certainly,
we are
yeah.
going to definitely have a part 2. So I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us on Somerset Stories. And I want to thank Robin and Sarah for joining us. And definitely, you're coming back, I would say a rain check, but not for a rain check, right? Thank you so much.